what is your earliest memory of being introduced to the music of Sparks?
My earliest memory of Sparks is watching the British music show Top of the Pops, which I guess I started watching when I was like 3 years old. And in 1979, when I was 5 years old, I remember seeing Sparks on the show because they cut a very distinctive, like, they were very distinctive looking guys, and they're also staring down the camera at you, which is quite disconcerting when they're kind of sandwiched between happy, smiley pop acts. So I remember the visuals of Sparks. And then separately from that, my parents used to buy me and my brother these KTEL chart compilations on vinyl with like these kind of 20-track albums, 10 tracks aside. And one of them had Beat the Clock by Sparks on it. So then at the tender age of 5, I was listening to Beat the Clock by Sparks a lot and not necessarily understanding the lyrics, but really enjoying the vibe of it. Not that I would have known what the word vibe meant when I was 5 years old. So it was something that alone was like the start of an obsession. And in a pre-internet age, it was very difficult to kind of gather information about like a band that you liked, especially a band like Sparks, who were pretty enigmatic. So it took me a long time to find out more about them, but they kept coming back into my life. And I guess by like maybe about 20 years ago, around the time that they released Little Beethoven, you know, it turned into a full-on obsession at this point. And so I think with each passing year, my sort of admiration for them has just grown and grown because they keep releasing like albums that are as ambitious and inventive as anything that they had done when they started.
Considering you've been a fan for so long, what motivated your decision to create the documentary at this time and not earlier in your career? Why did you feel their story needed to be told?
That is a long question to repeat at the start of the answer. Why I wanted to make the documentary is because I felt that why I wanted to make this documentary is because I felt that Sparks as a band did not have the trajectory of any other band that I could think of. Like most bands who started in the 70s may have like had their golden years in the 70s and then started to sort of tail off and have that kind of like rise and then rise and fall and rise again. And Sparks has sort of got a very sort of strange career where they're sort of like a career of like constant ups and downs and left turns. And then amazingly, they just seem to be making stuff that's as good as what they did in the first place. But it keeps getting bolder and more ambitious. And they don't seem like daunted by anything. They sort of found like a way to exist where they don't have to really answer to anybody. And it's an odd thing to see a band who are in their 5th decade to still be gathering younger fans. So seeing all of that happen and being at gigs of theirs with a really diverse age range to the crowd, I just felt that theirs was a story that needed telling.
And then last question, how did you first meet Ron and Russell, and what was their reaction to you wanting to make a documentary about their lives and career?
I'm starting to flag, sorry. So the first time I got in touch with Ron and Russell, well, the first time I met Ron and Russell was quite magical for me because like after having been a fan of theirs for decades and then being somewhat enigmatic characters, and you know, with a lot of rock stars, you don't even think that they live on planet Earth. You don't, you know, think that they actually exist in the real world. But one day in 2015, I was writing Baby Driver, and my friend, the screenwriter Michael Bacall, was in the office with me. And the conversation turned, as it frequently did with me, to Sparks. And he knew one song, and I said, oh, you've got to listen to this album. So that very quickly turned to a Sparks marathon. And then whilst we were listening to a lot of classic Sparks, I said, oh, I wonder if Sparks are on Twitter. And so I looked at their Twitter page and it said, Sparks follows you. And this was major because to me, they were like the J.D. Salingers of rock. So I just like messaged them immediately, said, "Hey, is this actually the band? I'm such a huge fan." And Russell replied, said, "Yeah, this is Russell. We love your movies." And then within 48 hours, I was meeting them for breakfast and at Russell's house. And that was amazing. And then it was a couple of years after that, I'd seen them live a couple of times now. I saw them with FFS at the Wilton in Los Angeles, which was just extraordinary. And I was like just dumbfounded by how great Russell's voice was and how like they as a band were sort of keeping up with Franz Ferdinand, who had the energy of a band that were like, you know, from 30 years younger than them. And it was sort of extraordinary to witness. And then a later gig in 2017, by this point, I'd been saying to anybody that would listen, somebody needs to make a documentary about Sparks. You know, Sparks are the greatest, most influential band that don't have a documentary about them. So I kept saying this out loud, not necessarily thinking that I was going to make the documentary. But at this 2017 Sparks gig, Phil Lord was the person, my friend, the director, Phil Lord, he was the person who said, "You should make that movie." So I said, "Yeah, I will." And then I mentioned it to Ron and Russell that night. And they said, "We'd love you to do that." They then said that like they had over the years had other requests to do a documentary about them and had said no. I wasn't aware of this. And so that was kind of ironic because as a fan, I'd been aggrieved about the lack of a Sparks documentary. But very nicely, they were willing to trust me to make the movie. And so 3.5 years later, here we are.